Hello, everybody. Name is Jeremy Siskind. I'm the author of books like Jazz Piano Fundamentals. Can't spell fundamentals without fun. Here's book 3, which is Modal and Modern Jazz. You got 200 plus pages. That's 279 pages instructing you about modal and modern jazz piano, plus solo jazz piano, stuff like that. Head on over to jeremysiskind.com. Support the channel. Buy a book, buy 2, buy 3. The more you get, the better the deal is. Today, I want to talk about one small aspect that I think makes pianists playing sound more modern. I associate this with people like Carey, people like Brad Meldau, and this is using what we might call upper structures, plus either the second or the fourth of that structure. So, what does that mean? Well, let's look at it this way. So, an upper structure is a triad that you can form. Sometimes we could argue that upper structures could be seventh chords. And but for now, we're going to stick with triads. A triad that you can form as part of, out of other notes of a chord. So, for instance, let's take a simple example. So here's an F major seventh. Obviously, we can form an F triad. That's not an upper structure. That's the lower structure. But in that simple major seventh, we also have an A minor chord. This isn't a very fancy or interesting upper structure, but hopefully you can get the concept. We're making that chord out of the notes of a pre-existing chord. Now, if we add the ninth, now we have another possibility for an upper structure. We have the C major chord up here, right? And in a major seventh chord, we could also add the 13th. And now we have one more upper structure, D, F, and A, form a D minor. Now this gets really interesting on dominant chords, right? Because dominant chords, we can add all these alterations, and so we have just a massive amount of upper structures that are possible. In fact, in Jazz Piano Fundamentals Book 2, you can find this complete list of upper structures. Let me see if I can find the page real quick, because this is going to make really great content. Just looking for pages. Here it is, page 228. Here's the different upper structures possible for different chord types. This top line is major, this next line is minor, and then these two are for dominant. So, if you want to learn about upper structures, Jazz Piano Fundamentals Book 2. But that's the basic idea. Now, what I'm telling you here is that besides, finding, let's say, a C major chord within F major, we could, if we want to sound modern, people like Chick Corea, Brad Meldau, Aaron Parks, Jeff Keyser, you name them, we could add in the 2 to that upper structure. Now, what's fun, before I tell you what's fun, or the 4, right? So now I'm relating it to the chord that we've formed, right? I'm not really thinking about F major 7 anymore. I'm thinking about the C triad, and I'm adding the second scale degree for what we might call an add 2 kind of chord, or that 4th scale degree. I guess we could call it an add 4 chord, but that's not really terminology we use too commonly in jazz theory. And these shapes are really beautiful for that really modern sound. Now, here's what's fun. I promised you something fun. What's fun is that 2 or that 4, they might be part of the original chord and scale, or maybe they're not part of the original chord and scale. In this case, they both are. And so here, we could use these shapes as I improvise. So I'm going to use these 4 notes to improvise over an F major chord. Okay. Now, those of you who are really astute out there, really top-notch theorists, are going to say this is actually very close to the pentatonic scale, and you'd be absolutely right. Very close to the pentatonic scale. The 1, 3, 4, 5 is not quite as close, but also a really important shape for this really bright, modern Technicolor sound that we're used to hearing from these great pianists. Really lovely sound. Now let's find an example where where the added note really isn't going to be part of the chord. Okay, so we're going to take a slightly more complex example because this is just a little bit trickier to do. So we're going to take a C7. So there's your root, third, and seventh of a C7. Now, we might use this A major upper structure. I'm sorry that is written with a D flat instead of a C sharp. That's very lame. But this is the 13th, flat 9, and third of the dominant chord. Cool. Already very colorful, but not really that weird for jazz. This is not a, unusual sound by any means. Now, if we add in the 2 to this upper structure, it's going to be B natural. Right? This is a note that really should not be used. It's a no-no note. A no-no note against C7. But what happens here is that this forms such a strong unit together that even though the B doesn't fit, our ears say, okay, it's out. It's strange. Maybe it's unexpected, but it sounds intentional, let's say. Right. Now, I wouldn't land on that B. I wouldn't, pound out that B. But you could hear that in that context. Okay. Now, certainly we also could use the 1, 3, 4, 5, which is actually kind of interesting because this gives us both the flat 9 and the natural 9, which are 2 notes that we usually would not use together, right? Usually we choose either the flat 9 or the natural 9. So now we have this other interesting shape against the C7. Which basically no scale that I can think of, other than the chromatic scale, is going to give you those 2 notes together in this context. Okay. So I've got a little sheet here. So first thing that I'm showing you is just, in the key of C. Here's like just taking the C triads. This is your C add 2, right? And we hear this a lot in pop music. So in that sense, it kind of makes sense that it appears in this modern jazz, which tends to combine some elements of pop music with jazz. And then I guess we can call this C add 4. I don't have a better name for it. Now, you might be wondering, is this possible with minor chords? And the answer is yes, but it's generally slightly less interesting with minor chords. Sure, we could do the same thing with a C minor add 2. And you do hear this sound, as well as the C minor add 4. This is less interesting. Again, that one here is part of the pentatonic scale and part of the blues scale. So it's kind of going to stand out a little bit less than if you do this with major. Now, I wrote a little 2-5-1 improvisation really focusing on this concept. And so let's listen to it first. So it's a 2-5-1 in C, D minor, G7, C major. And here's the improvisation. It's a lot of eighth notes. Whew. One more time. So it doesn't really go outside of the chords until we get to the C major, and we'll talk about that. So what's happening here? Let's zoom in. So this is a G triad plus the 4. I'll just call it a plus, can be confusing. G add 4, right? Can you see it's G, B, C, and D? And this is a C triad with the 4th added. So these are all part of that regular old D Dorian mode, but because of the way we're slicing it, it has a different sound. Okay. And these are just connecting notes because it was going to be too much to just go from one thing to another. And then here it's the E triad. This is actually the same relationship that we looked at just now with this A is the 4th, add 4. Listen to how that sounds. here we're doing a G, add 2. And now here we're going a little bit outside the expected key. This is an E triad, add 2. So we're kind of going into an augmented world. And then here it's a D triad, add 4. Which gives the C major kind of a Lydian sound, right? And you'll notice that if we kind of look overlapping here, this is a D triad, add 2. So there's kind of like an elision between these two things. So this is how I've constructed this line. To have a bit of a modern sound. This next thing I want to show you is more voicing oriented, and I stole this or borrowed it or transcribed it from a recording by John Raymond and S. Carey. Shout out John Raymond, great trumpet player, S. Carey, great singer, producer, songwriter, dude. And they collaborated, really beautiful album. And the opening to one of their songs, if you just look at the treble clef line, it looks like it's all in C, right? But then they harmonize it all with the same exact shape. We could call this planing when we move the same exact shape. And this shape is one that you could find a lot of places in this kind of modern jazz, jazz kind of sound. So this is a C triad, add 2, but it's over E. Before I show you everything, let's listen to how this sounds together. I'm doing this from memory, so sorry, John and S. Carey. I don't know what your actual first name is, if I got anything wrong. But we're basically moving the same exact add 2 shape with the third in the bass. We're moving it by equal amounts beneath this melody, which is all in C. And so in the first half, it so happens that everything stays in the key of C, right? No sharps, no flats. But then in the second half, as we harmonize over that next section, then things start to move out of the key, which is really kind of the fun part here. One more thing to notice is that even within the melody, it's this kind of sus shape that could be related to that 1, 2, 3, 5 formulation, right? There it is in C, and then in A. All right, this video has gotten pretty long. I have one more thing planned, but I'm gonna save that for the next video. So stay tuned. What I'm gonna show you how to do next time is how to actually apply this to a tune. How would we go about looking at chords and then finding voicings that have this kind of more modern sound? If this kind of stuff is interesting to you, as I said, if you want to learn more about upper structures, that's here in Jazz Piano Fundamentals Book 2. If you want to learn more about capturing this modern sound, pentatonics, these 1, 2, 3, 5, 1, 3, 4, 5, kind of modern sounds, Kenny Kirkland, Brad Meldau, McCoy Tyner, Herbie Hancock, that's the kind of thing that's really covered in depth in Book 3 of Jazz Piano Fundamentals. So check those out. If you managed to watch the end, thank you very much for checking it out. Use the word modern in your comments, and then I'll know you watched to the very end. Thanks, everybody.